Hello guys and gals, me Mudahar, and today I've got a bit of a sad little gaming video to talk about. Now, one of my favorite channels on the internet, Accursed Farms, Ross, the fellow behind something known as Stop Killing Games, an initiative that's simple. Stop killing video games. You know, you and I love playing video games. You know, we probably play video games released literally today, okay? There's a game called Death Stranding 2 I'm pretty excited for. It's coming out in a couple days. You know, boom, excited. But I also play a lot of old stuff. I was playing Silent Hill 3 in a couple of videos ago, okay? Like on a PS2 emulator. I play old stuff, new stuff all the time. I think video games is a lot like art. You know when people go out and they listen to like Beethoven and shit like that, music from like back in the day? You know, it's stuff that's preserved. It's stuff that's not killed. It's there for everyone to listen to. You probably watch a lot of old movies in black and white, and thank God you can, because things are preserved. And when it comes to video games, well, the battle isn't exactly as easy. Now, Ross created a campaign known as Stop Killing Games, and unfortunately, today, it may be the end of Stop Killing Games. And unfortunately, it's not a good ending, it may actually be a bad ending. So to give you an idea, to go to the website, Stop Killing Games is a consumer movement started to challenge the legality of publishers destroying video games that they've sold to customers. So, look, I'm just gonna like cut through the misinformation and like cloud of nonsense pretty easily. I'm gonna give you guys a pretty simple example. This is a game called Need for Speed 2015. Now you might be like, whoa, this seems fun. I'm driving cars and everything. This is a game that you're forced to connect online with, okay? It was a problem when it came out, and it still actually is a problem now. Now the game's actually good, but see the problem is, because it requires a connection to the internet, when that, server goes offline, this game is effectively killed. It's dead. Now you might remember, obviously, with Stop Killing Games, when we first talked about it, Ubisoft had a game called The Crew, which went offline. They took away people's actual video game purchase, and it just kind of went up and poof into the air. This is what's going to happen with Need for Speed if things don't get addressed. Now, again, to give you an idea, imagine if you go to a store, right? And you have a copy of Need for Speed, you go up, you go to the cashier, you're like, hey man, can I have Need for Speed? And they're like, well, sure thing, it'll be $59.99. And you're like, okay. And you go home, you install your game, and it's like all good, you don't know any better. But imagine if the cashier, did this instead. Hey man, can I buy Need for Speed? Sure, it'll be $59.99. Of course, let me give you the money. Hold on there, pal. Do you know that if this game's online servers go out, you'll lose access to it? And you're the consumer, you're like, whoa, wait, that doesn't seem logical. Wait, you're telling me that this game that I'm buying right now, I mean, you could even flip it with something like Rainbow Six Siege. You're telling me this game that I bought, I won't really own it? Well, of course you won't. You mean I don't own this game like a lot of other games that I own that I buy physically or I just buy access to? No, you're actually renting the game. I feel like if instead of the words purchase at a store, we had the words rental, that would probably change a lot of minds going forward, right? Now, obviously, according to Stop Killing Games, an increasing number of video games are sold effectively as goods, with no stated expiration date, but designed to be completely unplayable as soon as support from the publisher ends. So again, when you go to a store and you buy a copy of these games, they don't really tell you on the box, this is the day your access will die. If games did that, bro, let me tell you, they would not fucking sell. And second of all, it would be at least a clear, indicator to the person buying that, yeah, I might as well spend my $60 somewhere else. I'm not a total dribbling idiot. Come on now. And that's basically the idea that this wants to do. Now, I've talked about this, and unfortunately, you're looking at 455,000 signatures. Now, the really scary part about this is Stop Killing Games has went through pretty much every single bit of uphill battling you could imagine. And the thing is, there are only two real dates, according to Ross, that really matter. For instance, July 14th and July 31st is when we have to get the final signatures for the UK government petition and the European Citizens Initiative. Now, this is the problem for me particularly because I'm a Canadian, okay? Most of my audience are fucking Americans. There's a lot of people that watch me that are from the EU, but I don't think I can drum up enough signatures to get the 100,000. We're at 16,500 right now. Now, unfortunately, if you go to the actual like signature, if I go over here, only British citizens and UK citizens can sign this, right? So I'm neither one of them, so I can't really do this. And the ECI, well, similar things here. For instance, if you pick your country of nationality, at least from a Canuck, I can't find Canada anywhere here. Trust me, if I was a European man, I would pick a European applicable country and just fucking go for it. But unfortunately, you can't. Now, in this situation, you need at least over 550,000 signatures, or just 500,000+ signatures to get, okay? It's fucked how, like, hard and uphill this entire battle has gone. But obviously, you know, it's still a battle that I and Ross and I think hundreds of thousands of gamers clearly fucking believe in. Now, the reason why this initiative is so important is if you can make change happen in Europe, well, you can probably make change happen all over the world. It's one of the biggest markets out there. And if you can make change happen there, then developers who are thinking about sunsetting their games have to think about one of the biggest markets, and usually that'll just carry over across the entire world in theory. You know, if they're going to do something different for Europe, you probably would imagine they'd have to do something similar for America and Canada, right? Unless they're really adamant on killing games, and this is just a way to force them to not remove products that we end up buying. Now, one of the things that, you know, has really kind of rubbed me weird about this is one online content creator known as Piratesoftware. Now, Piratesoftware is a pretty popular creator. You know, he's somebody that is known as an independent video game developer. He's a pretty popular personality. And according to Ross, and I wasn't really knowledgeable about how much of an impact Piratesoftware has had, but one of his videos regarding Stop Killing Games was actually filled with a lot of misinformation, according to Ross, and honestly, according to even Louis Rossmann. And honestly, me at this point, the more I watch any content related to this, critical of this video by Piratesoftware, because realistically, it really seems like he might have been somebody that has taken the wind out of the sails.
Thor's coverage has been bigger than literally anyone else on those lists, except Asmongold. And the only video Asmongold had on this bigger than Thor's was about Thor's video. So for all practical purposes, Thor here has been the #1 voice on the campaign, and he's been lying about what it is. But if I did a response video, which is not something I wanted to do anyway, then it might look like drama farming, which could understandably turn off a lot of people from the campaign, because it's not about that at all.
And it shouldn't be about any form of like petty online beef or disagreement. Realistically, Stop Killing Games is just a really good initiative, okay? It's an initiative that at least gets developers, or not developers, but publishers to think about the games that they make going forward, right? The thing about Stop Killing Games is it's not a way for them to go into the past and start forcing stuff onto developers. It's about setting a path forward so that developers who are, you know, or publishers that are, you know, creating brand new games have this in mind as they have to like create games. They have to have a logical sunset plan, so when things come down the road, you know, severing a video game and giving people the software they bought is not something that's impossible. Now, one of the things that I personally kind of like looked at when Thor released his videos back then was the idea of vague laws, right? But honestly, watching a further piece by Louis Rossmann, I realized why vagueness in this situation is actually not a bad thing. For instance, if we go to the ECI's page, one of the objectives you'll see over here is that the initiative does not seek to acquire ownership of said games, associated intellectual rights, or monetization rights. So in no way are we trying to like, you know, get through the copyright wagon and trying to make games or any of this proprietary software that is developed in any way public information, right? Or just letting, you know, or forcing companies rather to give up their intellectual properties or their proprietary systems rather. Neither does it expect the publisher to provide resources for the said video game once they discontinue it, while leaving it in a reasonable, functional, playable state. So reasonably is the strong word. And when you look at it from the actual perspective of common sense, yeah, the idea is a reasonable, functional state. Like, imagine if, you know, all of a sudden Halo Infinite was supposed to be like at its end of life, right? Halo Infinite is a live service game to an extent. Now imagine at the end of its life, who's the company behind it? 343 Interactive or Microsoft. If at the end of its life they were like, all right, we're not going to service the multiplayer, we're not going to do whatever, but we'll cut the tether to the actual internet services and allow you to like maybe play a LAN match, do something split screen, play the single player, do some Forge stuff. We're not going to give you access to obviously matchmaking servers because they're not there anymore. We're also not going to give you leaderboards or things like that require a server to be active, right? So that's a reasonable experience. Similar to like the crew, right? Like imagine if Ubisoft was like, all right, we're removing the crew from sale. We'll give you access to this game's single player component, which that's the majority of it. You just can't do anything with the online leaderboards or online matchmaking because reasonably that doesn't exist. And reasonably is a strong word here. Now, when it comes to Ross, obviously this is not supposed to be some crazy drama between creators or anybody. It's just supposed to be gamers who look at good law, good objectives, and think, yes, I care about video games. I want video games preserved. Let's just try to get these companies to at least respect video games and their preservation going forward. It's something that should be, what is the word, bipartisan? Something that should just not be a divisive effort. We're all gonna die, right? That's a morbid way to put it, but like music, like movies, like software, like other softwares in general, not just video games, you wanna make sure that this stuff lasts hundreds of years in the future, and you wanna make sure you lay the groundwork now so that going into the future from 2025, 2026 onwards, we as gamers don't have to worry about future games facing this crisis today.
So for those who don't understand, the Stop Killing Games initiatives is basically we don't want single-player games to have DRM that the developers can turn off and thus render the single-player games inactive anymore. This is what they want to change. They need to be specific that they're talking about single-player games that do not need a server to support them.
No.
And as much as they want it to be about specifically games where it is a single-player game that has always online functionality, it would impact every live service game that exists.
So again, this is a distinction that wasn't even being made. Nobody's talking about just single-player games or multiplayer games or anything of this nature, okay? We're just talking necessarily about every game under the sun, okay? That's realistically everything that's it. And Ross made a pretty good slide in his video where he talked about it too, like just as a good example. For instance, games that are sold as a one-time purchase that don't require a connection. So say you're playing Shenmue 1 and 2, the HD collection. Well, congratulations, you're not even part of the equation. The game is just a one-time purchase. It's a purely single-player experience. No one gives a shit, okay? It's not being destroyed. As long as you have the disc and functional hardware, you're good. Games sold as a one-time purchase with no stated expiration date that require a connection to the publisher or affiliated parties. So yes, in certain cases like this, you're talking about games like I mentioned earlier, Need for Speed, where you buy it once, but you need to connect to EA servers to play it. Well, going forward, developers and publishers should have some plan going forward so that down the road, when the server is stopped, they can at least push a patch to the game to give you reasonable functionality. That's not outlandish. Games that are completely free. Again, no impact. If you want to download Jets Rampage, the fucking like PC game from like back in 2003, you can download that and play it just fine. No issues there. Microtransactions for games sold as a one-time purchase with no stated expiration date. The publisher would be required to implement an end-of-life plan when support ends, so the customer's microtransaction would not be permanently disabled. Imagine if you bought a video game, even if it's a single player or if it's a multiplayer game, you bought like a $20 skin. Fuck, there's a $40 skin for like Rainbow Six Siege now that I saw for Valkyrie. Imagine if you spent 40 bucks on something and, down the road, if they ever wanted to remove it, they clearly can, you would lose access to your $40 purchase right there and then, which again is insane for a microtransaction, but that's the world we live in. Games that are sold as a service with a stated expiration date. They would attempt to require publishers to have some sort of end-of-life build when support ends. But they would probably fail as there's no basis in consumer law for this. Only justification would be via art and culture preservation laws, which are very weak. Now, a good example of this would be an MMO, right? Like something like Final Fantasy XIV Online. Now, there's no way for you to play that game without an online subscription or a connection to Square Enix's servers. But let's just go down the road and say, all right, well, fuck it. What about like down the road, if, you know, they're done with their game, can we possibly have a build of it, you know, without connecting to your servers? And maybe Square Enix could provide that. They certainly don't need to. And sometimes you get lucky with popular MMOs like FF14, where like the original version of it, there are private servers that you can access and you can play to have some preserved build of the game that's there. But I'm going to touch upon this a little bit going forward because it has a lot to pertain to how Piratesoftware is kind of like talked about the situation. Like in Ross's video, one thing that he points out really well, actually, that I think really nips the point here is that when it comes to Blizzard's own terms of service, right, where Blizzard reserves the right to terminate the agreement at any time for any reason or for no reason, with or even without notice to you. So for instance, if you buy a game from them, they can just remove access right there. And the thing is, the whole point is not to argue about this, it's to make sure that this whole clause doesn't fucking exist. Because you can understand how this is entirely hostile to the actual person, right? Like imagine buying Diablo 4 and not getting to keep access to the game, not because the servers are gone, it's just because Blizzard can take it away at any given moment. They don't even have to give you your fucking money back from what it seems in the situation. They can just be like, all right, the game's out from your library, we're not even going to bother engaging. You gave us money. We gave you a fuck you. It is what it is. If you can't see the problem in that, then there's no point in you watching the rest of my video. I'm sorry to say, like, you're never going to get it.
You want that to stay in a functional playable state. That means the devs have to release either server binaries or somehow carve off the game to be a single player experience now.
So this is the most important part from one of Thor's videos for me, where he talks about like, you know, what the developers have to do. So he said it very quickly, right? Like you have to release server binaries for games that are online only, right? Or games that are, you know, MMOs, so that when the end of life comes, I guess people have access to playing their games. Now, for me, I've known how the back end of like some of these MMOs work. And for instance, like back in the day, I'm not saying that I ever did this for World of Warcraft because I'd be against TOS, but there were private servers where you could just download binaries and you could run private servers on your local device. And, you know, those were binaries that I'm not going to deny. I haven't looked at them for a while, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was some copyrighted code somewhere in there, okay? But, you know, obviously, if you had things like a server binary, like the copyrighted code, you could probably run this stuff, you know, relatively well. Now, one thing that I will agree with Thor on over here is sometimes it may not be easy for a game to cut itself off. So for instance, let's say that you're designing an MMO game, right? And I'm going to make this as simple as possible. Whenever you connect to an MMO game like World of Warcraft, you launch a client. Your client communicates with a server. Now, sometimes on that server, there could be other technologies that don't belong to Blizzard, for instance, that they need to, you know, license, they need to interface with in order to run their game. So obviously, it may be a problem down the road when World of Warcraft ends, if it ends, that to release that binary, they have to start calling up some of these companies, like calling them and being like, hey, by the way, can we distribute some of your code? Can we distribute like whatever you've licensed with us? And that company may or may not agree, right? But again, the whole point of this initiative going forward is that the goal is to set the slate going forward, right? Like, you want to make sure that if this passes, down the road, companies will have to go, all right, so when I'm designing my game in the future with these online-only connections or DRM, that when it comes time to sunset the game, I can distribute the server binaries easier, I can distribute a patch easier, without me having to carve out really invasive parts of my server stack that I may not be able to, right? And if, again, an initiative like this passes, big companies will create actual compliance software so that down the road, if a game needs to be patched out, the compliance software may be picked over, you know, another industry-leading solution, simply because, you know, companies love to make a lot of money, right? And so when it comes to a server stack, you know, 10, 15 years when it needs to be cut, they can easily sever the game from the server solution or release that server solution because it's by design, when they first designed the system, they designed the game, it's not made in a way that is so janky, right? It's already created with the foresight that it has to go offline at some point. So when that day comes, you know, disconnecting the server and patching the game is not a daunting task.
I'm gonna actively tell people not to. That is awful. That is a horrible goddamn direction. That's awful, dude. No, eat my entire ass. The level of stupid that I just had to receive was like sitting on Twitter for 12 hours. This shit sucks. That's a really stupid-ass move. That's an incredibly stupid-ass move. I think this is ass. This is complete garbage. All of this can eat shit, then. I drop the mask entirely.
Like, I guess if you care a lot about, like, maybe live service games needing to exist and you're okay with shit being sunsetted, then, yeah, I guess then Thor is just not somebody that gives too much of a shit about maybe game preservation. Or maybe he genuinely has gotten it wrong. I really am trying to find the best in somebody in this situation. I actually really didn't know that his coverage of Stop Killing Games was actually so negative to the point that, according, I guess at least to Ross from Accursed Farms, it may actually be a situation where it really did take the wind out of those signatures, right? Like, you know, the signature, you know, pileup that's kind of stuck here and has been stuck here for a while, you know, it's not able to really move the needle forward because, you know, one large creators like viewpoints were just so damaging or misinforming that maybe it really kind of did spook other people from really talking about this. Maybe it did make Ross seem like a more kookier individual. But look, ultimately the end, I've kept you here long enough, okay? The point of this whole video is game preservation. It really is, right? And game preservation is first and foremost, it's above any form of internet drama here. It's above any form of, like, you know, just one sole video game. It's about the future of this industry going forward, right? And it's not just about online video games. It's not just about single player video games. It's just about video games. Now, I know I faced my own trials and tribulations with the Switch 2 stuff, but I have only purchased this one game for Switch, right? Cyberpunk 2077 Ultimate Edition. Now, there's a lot of game key cards for the Switch that I don't obviously endorse or support, and I'm sure there's a lot of you that probably don't do it as well either. But I'm going to give you a good, like, comparison over here, something that I think would be kind of applicable. Imagine, would you have an issue with the game key cards if, let's say, tomorrow, Nintendo announced that, hey, we're going to have an online repository of, like, media that you can just download from. So let's say that you buy a Yakuza 0 game key card. Now, if you had the physical copy of that game, you can download the patch information or the download, like, whatever we would send to your Switch on your actual system. You can just copy that to an SD card, copy that to your Switch, whatever, and then you can put in your game key card. So you don't even need Nintendo servers to download the game key card from. So in the event that Nintendo servers go down, which they can, you can still get access to your physical game and you can download the materials off of a third-party site. Maybe it'll be shared around, maybe it'll be preserved, but there is ways for you to use something that doesn't completely keep it, you know, tethered to a server solution. And I want to ask you that honest question, like, would you have an issue with, like, game key cards then? Would you have an issue with, like, physical media that isn't complete then if the actual publishers provided you a way to download and update information and provide you concise, clear, and easy steps to install it to whatever console or system of your choice? If that was provided, would we as gamers have an issue? I don't think we would. I think in a lot of cases it would be more annoying, but it would also ensure that the stuff that you buy isn't a complete dud out of the actual, you know, out of the store. But yeah, Stop Killing Games, look, I've kept you here long enough. I can yap about this pretty much all day, every day. But the thing is, it's not looking good. You know, it's a bit of an uphill battle. And there's a lot of creators that I think have talked really well about this. I know Josh Strife Hayes has talked well about this. I know that Louis Rossman has talked really well. I know that Ross obviously has led this initiative going forward, and he's put a lot of his blood, sweat, and tears into it. So even if this initiative fails, which it can, you know, I don't want Ross to go away feeling like, I didn't do enough. You did more than enough. You did way more than you had to. But I don't know if it's just gamer apathy. I don't know what it is. But hopefully this video was long. You maybe learned something. You maybe got, you know, your center right on this topic. Maybe you figured out, you know, maybe we cut through some of the misinformation. Maybe we told you exactly what this stuff is all about. But the thing is, if this gets signed, this is the last Hail Mary. If these petitions get signed, specifically the ECI and the UK initiative, this might trigger an actual dialogue, a discussion for the stuff going forward. And if it comes into the positive side for gamers, it's a net benefit for the whole industry. Look, it's simple. Stop killing video games. Simple as that. There's a lot of video games that I've grown up with, I've loved, and will continue to love. But going into the future, I know that I'm getting older. I know that at some point I probably won't be able to play games anymore. At some point I'm going to be 6 feet in the fucking ground. And it's going to be a whole new generation of gamers. I mean, shit, to think about it, there's still people alive to this day that have been here since the Magnavox Odyssey days. So gaming is not necessarily such a... Video games itself is not like such an old industry to get into. In fact, it's been around very, very recently. And the thing is, if these laws are set now, it makes sure going forward in the next 100, 200, 300 years, however long our nations are around or human beings are around for the foreseeable future, at least our games can be preserved. And that's the most important part, right? I grew up playing a lot of games that I still play to this day, and I'm sure some of you guys that are in your 20s, maybe you're like 14, 15, and you're playing a game you really like right now, and down the road you want to experience it again when you're my age. Supporting initiatives like this is what's going to ensure that your games won't be dead going forward. But that said, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. I am out. Hello, guys and gals, me, Mutahar, and yeah, I pirated a game, man. I'll be real. I lived life on the edge. I broke the rules. I broke the law. Honestly, I expect federal agents to be at my doorstep, putting me in handcuffs, because I dared to pirate a video game from 2009. Now, you might be like, Muta, what prompted you to do this, right? Well, I was just somebody that wanted to play an old game, wanted to just relax, have a good night. I wanted to vibe out a little bit. And so I downloaded Splinter Cell Conviction. Now, these games are only like 8 gigabytes, so it took, honestly, a minute to do. It takes me longer to take a dump than download these old games, all right? And honestly, it's better than downloading a 60, 70, sometimes 100 gigabyte experience. So anyways, I just decided to hit that big old green play button, and I thought everything was going fine. It fired up that Ubisoft launcher, it gave me that little Ubisoft intro, and bam! I saw this error screen. Game startup awaiting first OC connection. Now, I thought, man, maybe I could hit the escape button and, ignore this dialogue prompt, but nope, you just exit straight to desktop. Yeah, this game is completely unplayable. Now, remember, I actually bought this game off of Ubisoft, and just to give you an idea, right, you can go to the Steam store page right now, and you can buy the Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell Echelon Edition. You can buy all these games for $40. You can buy these games for $40, and you get completely ripped off. Now, it turns out this isn't the only group of gamers that actually has this problem. Turns out the guys who love to play games like Assassin's Creed 2, and I made a whole video talking about how awesome Assassin's Creed 2 is. You should check it out. So I do love this game. I really do. And turns out the DRM has also said the same thing to those players. Those guys can't even play the game that they downloaded. And also, fun fact, that game is being sold on Steam for $20. Notice, multiplayer and online features are no longer available. Bro, the whole game isn't available. Fuck the online and multiplayer. The single player isn't even available. So why is it that a single player game, Muta, requires you to have any form of online connectivity? What's wrong? What happened to gaming? Well, back in the day, 15 years ago, this video by Eternal Damnation, boy, that name sends me back to high school, uploaded a video. Assassin's Creed 2 DRM is terrible. Now, if we watch this video, muted, by the way, because you definitely put in copyrighted music, guy buys a game, loads it up online, and lo and behold, at some point down the road later, the game gives him a dialogue prompt. An internet connection is required to play this game. Fail to connect to the Ubisoft master servers. Please verify that your internet connection is functional. All right, so that's pretty goddamn serious, right? And then he goes on YouTube and is like, all right, guys, subscribe and like and comment, which I highly think you should, okay? I think you should go from 53 subscribers to whatever God allows him. But let me tell you something messed up over here, man. Back in the day when these games dropped, they had one of the shittiest DRMs. So, for instance, if you bought this game on the Xbox 360, and even if you bought it on, the iPod Touch back in the day, things would work. If you just have a 360 lying around and a copy of Splinter Cell Conviction, slap that disc in, and you can play with yourself, or you can fucking find somebody else and play split screen. What a novel concept. However, the PC version implemented Ubisoft's new DRM, which requires a permanent internet connection. So when you played games like Assassin's Creed 2 at launch on PC, PC, let's say that for a second your internet went out, okay? Like some blurb happened, and you're just minding your own, playing the single player, something that doesn't even touch the internet. Well, Ubisoft would just put this giant, like, little screen on, it's just this flashing white light. It'll just say, hey, when you get that internet again, you can play the game you paid for by yourself. What a shitty concept. Now, because of how entrenched this dog shit is, the modern Ubisoft releases are now broken. Ubisoft's done something that's completely destroyed this one game. And you might be like, but Muda, wasn't Splinter Cell Conviction a bad game? I've always wanted a John Wick video game, not the John Wick Hex video game, but one where you could run around, blow like 10 dudes in the head, and just use the craziest combat features imaginable. You can do that with Splinter Cell Conviction. It's just a good game. I like this game. And you know what? It doesn't even matter what the quality of the fucking game is. I can't even play a Ubisoft game that I bought all the way back in the day, back in the 2010s, in 2020. People are always like, why would you play old games and you're gonna have internet forever? This is a perfect example of I have internet forever, right? Like I'm really using the best internet possible. Why am I not allowed to play an old school fucking PC game in 2025? How is it just not possible? Why am I getting these brain dead errors? So at this moment in time, ladies and gentlemen, I had to go to the dark side. Okay, how do I play a game that I actually paid for? Well, there's two options, okay? You can tuck your tail between your legs and you can walk away. Or you can sail the seven seas. You can find the fittest of girls in the gyms around you, and maybe they might have a copy of a game that you want to play. I'm not advocating piracy, by the way. I really think piracy is a sinful, wrong thing. It's illegal. It's unethical. You won't be allowed into the kingdom of heaven from what I've been told. But yeah, the idea is I had to actually go on and find a copy of Splinter Cell Conviction and cracked exe files in order to get this whole situation functioning. So I figured, why not make this a bit of an educational video for the audience watching, right? Now let's say that you're somebody on the magical world of Linux, like me. And you're like, Muda, how do you even install these third-party games without Steam and all this other stuff? Well, just to give you a legal analog, another game that I wanted to experience from my childhood was Guns the Duel. Now, if you've never played Guns the Duel, think of a combat shooter, an arena shooter that requires you to be on a metric fuck ton of Adderall to play. That's a game. So I went to a private server, F-Guns, Freestyle Guns, which is probably the only large Guns the Duel area that you can play on. I made an account, and lo and behold, I scrolled down. It's a pretty nice website. I even saw that the #1 player was Donald Trump. If the president of the United States is playing this game with a level 99, 3.11 KDA, from South Korea, it's got to be a banger game. So I decided to just go over here, download the file, and it would give me an actual exe file that I could install. So at this moment in time, sites like this also provide a Linux guide, but I'll show you how this works. So using a program on Linux known as Lutris, you can actually install versions of Windows software and video games underneath this layer. So what you do is you go to this big plus sign, you go to install a video game from an executable, and then you can name it whatever you want. So here I can call it Guns or Guns Freestyle, and as long as I just basically hit install here, it'll ask me for a setup file. So I just give it a setup file. It asks me for an installation directory, which it'll auto-generate based on the name. I just hit the words continue. And here I can just go into the setup file, browse, go to my downloads, and right over here I'm sure I can find F-Guns installer. So as soon as I hit OK, as soon as I slap that installation right over here, all you'll notice is it's generating a configuration for me. So what it does is, much like Steam for Linux, it creates a little directory, a small kind of Windows installation, a light installation, that allows me to install Windows applications. So for instance, right here, it'll ask me all this setup. So assuming you're installing any kind of third-party software, whether it be, I guess, acquired through the open seas or through a legitimate channel, all you got to go through is follow the typical instruction on Windows. So it'll give me the basic next. It'll ask me to wait for the agreement prompt, which I will. And then, of course, it'll say, hey, install to your directory. Now, this directory may not reflect what you just saw in Lutris, but that's because this is following a traditional Windows path, right? Generally, it will be installed under the directory you saw in the Lutris client. So go next, hit next. You can even ask it to make a desktop shortcut. Go next, hit install. And Bob's your uncle, once this is done, all of a sudden you can now go to your Guns Freestyle. And sometimes you may have to go right click, browse the files, and just go to the Drive C over here. You can go to Program Files x86 if the install was 32-bit, which for Guns it is because it's such an old game. But if it's a 64-bit game, just go to Program Files. And again, once you go over here, you can go to Freestyle Guns. Let me just get rid of this right here. And as long as you find the launcher file, which for this, it's actually guns.exe in the directory, all you have to do is go back to the actual install you made. So right-click, configure, and of course go to Game Options, and underneath Executable, you can go all the way to the end, and as long as this reflects, so here it's actually auto-tagged it to launcher.exe. Well, that's actually the right answer. So again, some experimentation is required. If you find launcher or game, it's really just try either one and see which one works best. So at this moment in time, all you do is double click the actual launcher, and like a Windows game, or really anything, it'll just launch the actual thing for you. So here it is, fguns.net. So here I can just hit Start Game, and boom, I can play Guns the Duel. Now this also extends to other installations as well too. For instance, I went on my GOG account and I decided, you know what, I wanted to play an old game from here. So this is kind of a good legal analog to something that you would find floating in the 7 seas of the internet. So what I did was I went to Alpha Protocol, really good game. I decided to download all of those original installers, and the same process effectively applied. I just went to Lutris again, installed it like I just showed you, and boom, I actually had Alpha Protocol, and all I have to do is double click on this, and I have the entire game ready to play. Now, to go back to Splinter Cell, how did I fix my option? Well, I decided to go on Reddit, and the closest thing that I found was 5 years ago. Some guy was teaching how to run Splinter Cell Conviction on Windows 10 in 2020. It's crazy to think that 2020 was like 5 years ago, man. Time really does fly. But when I was looking at the actual information over here, it led me through like a guide that I felt like I needed a college education to understand. Like you wanted me to go through so many menus over here, and it really didn't have to be this complicated. All it really took me was going into the old, open seas of the internet and finding an old ISO file alongside a no CD crack. So yeah, once I found this pirated copy of the game that was available on a site where I could also download iStripper. Yeah, by the way, these no CD cracks do come with what appears to be triggered like malware results. Like you'll find things like this triggering in your Windows Defender or antiviruses. And generally speaking, like these sites will say these are false alarms, but again, none of this should be done without any, again, it's all up to you, right? Like it's all up to you if you want to risk your computer or anything by doing it. But anyways, I downloaded these like, DRM fixes and fixed files, and I actually installed a pirated version of Conviction, which surprisingly worked. Until I found out that, guess what? The DLC didn't work. Yeah, the DLC that you also pay money to play, which actually comes with a few cool maps. Yeah, that also required me to do further fixes to this. So thankfully, I found the Splinter Cell Fusion Fix mod, which if you go all the way down over here, you can download this Fusion Fix, and it actually adds a whole bunch of options. Skip intros, restore LAN support, partial ultra-wide, all the boons that a company like Ubisoft should have probably provided, but they didn't. But most importantly, add an option to unlock DLC content that's unavailable after servers shut down. Now, again, when I pirated Splinter Cell with the no CD cracks and this mod, I did it also on my Steam Deck to show you like how this works. So yes, following the same instructions that I gave you earlier. Wow, almost Linus Tech Tips my Steam Deck. You can go over here and boom, hit OK, and lo and behold, thank God for piracy because I can fucking play this game again. How stupid is that? And not only can I play the game again, but if I'm gonna just check the DLCs, yeah, I have access to all of the extra maps as well. So, God bless video game piracy, because without video game piracy, I would not have been able to play this old game that I was enjoying. And especially when I mapped the controls to controller, I can play it just like I did on my 360 with triple the frame rate. That's crazy. You know, the thing about Splinter Cell and Ubisoft is they'll do really stupid shit. Like, on May 30th, they tweeted out this, like, image of, like, Sam Fisher, like, from a CGI cutscene in the original games. And it's like, bro, you're not even doing anything with the franchise. What do you do? What are you doing at this point? You don't even care about Splinter Cell. Why is the company so busy getting their social media manager to tweet about this stupid bullshit when they're actually selling you fraudulent like software? They're selling you games that do not work. These are games that are actively on the store and they're broken as shit, and Ubisoft isn't fixing it. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video. It might be like, why are you screaming to the void, old man? Because honestly, I have a voice, and I feel like my voice can at least reach someone at Ubisoft. So instead of actually continuing to scam the audience by buying these experiences, they can probably spend just a little crumb of their money to set aside a team that can maybe fix a lot of their older games. You know, ironically, what's even wilder is like Capcom has Lost Planet 2, which is another great game. It just doesn't work because of Games for Windows Live. But you know what they did? They removed the purchasing option because they knew it was better to not sell people a lemon. Unlike Ubisoft. Yes, we are talking the bare minimum of at least delisting your fucking game so that you can try and attempt to fix it. Not that I think Capcom will. So it's better to play this on the RPCS3 emulator with the PlayStation Online, by the way. Games like Assassin's Creed 2, fuck Splinter Cell. Assassin's Creed 2 is probably arguably what shaped Ubisoft into the modern monolith that it's become. Why can you at least not fix something that old and gold? I don't get it. It just doesn't make any sense. I'm sure I'm not the only person screaming. You know, literally like 4 hours ago, one user was like, yeah, I was trying to play AC2 and that shit would give me an error. Game startup OC. Yeah, I know what it's like, homie. If anyone has any solutions, please help. Apparently, this problem started on June 4th, and only some people have found a solution. You know what the solution is, pal? Pirate the game. In fact, the top post is literally pirate the game. Just pirate the fucking game. Why? Why have we gotten to a point where we have to like pirate video games just to play the software that we bought? Either refund the people their money, Ubisoft, which I know they definitely won't do, or just fix the game. Simple as that. You can even steal from the community fixes themselves and just do it. Just patch it into the game. Just give people something, man. You know, it's like maybe they need some time away from like, you know, this massive sexual harassment trial that they have, which I guess maybe must be taking away their time, right, from focusing on all this. Where, yes, 3 executives in Ubisoft are actually in trial in France right now, accused of creating a company culture that allowed systemic harassment and sexism to thrive. So 3 guys, Thomas Francois, Serge Hassachet, and Guillaume Patrux have been accused of sexual and moral harassment. I don't even know what moral harassment is, but goddamn. I mean, it's a pretty serious trial, obviously, when one of the claims is one of the actual like defendants in this case showed up to a breakfast on a business trip with just straight up like porn on their phone and told their colleagues that he jerked off this morning. And Francois reportedly said, "I shouldn't have done that in front of a woman." The rest of the allegations were addressed, according to Le Monde, with denials or explanations. For instance, in response to questions about racist or homophobic remarks, he said he has gay friends. Oh, I'm not racist. I've got black friends. The black friend turns out to be like, yay. This is so stupid, man. But I mean, honestly, from a serious perspective, right? Like, according to one of the lawyers over here, they said, I've been a lawyer for 25 years, and I've seen some sordid files, but on this scale, never. So even if their victims are broken, used, if certain victims can no longer set foot in the company without the threat of being subjected to the same treatment, I want to underline the strength that they have. Now, of course, I don't doubt that Ubisoft's still showing up in every trade show and like E3 event or like, you know, game event that you can imagine. You know, especially from an industry that like a couple years ago pretty much was on, what was it, like Blizzard's throat, rightfully, for some of the most insane breast milk stealing culture that allegedly existed over there. So yeah, it's kind of insane to me to see this. Like, Ubisoft, just goddamn give us back the game. Just like... Fix your game. It shouldn't be this complicated. It shouldn't require me, the gamer, the guy that spent money on your product, to break the law just to play a game from like 15 years ago on a computer, right? Like, it shouldn't have to be that way. Unfortunately, it is. And I feel like unless actual pressure is applied to Ubisoft, or at least like, not even pressure, like at least if they know something is broken, then at least hopefully they can either delist the game, which I don't want that to be the solution, or better yet, just fix a single player game so it doesn't need to connect to the internet just to fucking play. That makes no sense. That just doesn't make any sense. Brother, make it make sense. Please. But anyways, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Hopefully you learned how to install third-party games on your Linux system. I wanted that to be a little bit educational just because people have always asked me, how do I install third-party stuff? And using things like Lutris or Bottles or really any container software is the best avenue. But that said, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Just like it if you dislike it, I am out. Hello, guys and gals, me, Mutahar, and we got a pretty big update to that Stop Killing Games story, ladies and gentlemen. Now, Stop Killing Games, for anybody that doesn't know, yes, 2 days ago I made a video where I talked about Stop Killing Games. I talked about how the initiative, basically was kind of at its finishing lines, and there really wasn't a lot of positivity in terms of it crossing its finish line. Now, of course, since then, ladies and gentlemen, there's been plenty of content creators that have covered this story. Charlie, me, obviously Ross, the person who spearheaded this campaign to start off with. And, 2 days ago, the actual initiative was at like 55,000 signatures? Today, ladies and gentlemen, in 2 days, it crossed 51%. Now, I really think a lot of this comes from the fact that obviously one of the biggest voices that is now talking about Stop Killing Games, probably Charlie at this point. And, obviously through the efforts of everybody speaking positively over here, that's a pretty big jump, okay? That's actually huge. And I don't think anybody should, discount it. Now, to me personally, I think having 500,000 signatures should be enough for the government to look at something and think, wow, we should kind of talk about, preserving software. Now, obviously, there was a bit of controversy to the Stop Killing Games stuff. We talked about it 2 days ago. There was a YouTuber known as Piratesoftware who very much was not a fan of Stop Killing Games, and apparently still doesn't seem to be a fan of Stop Killing Games. And to me, I don't really think of this as like, a drama thing or whatever. I think of it as just good laws to pass. I think it's just a good conversation to have. Obviously, I think of Stop Killing Games as, just one cog in the giant scheme, right? If you ever watch channels like Lewis Rossman, if you ever watched any tech channels, one of the most important things for a lot of people in this space is things like right to repair, right? Is like you should be able to own something. You should be able to have some dominion over the stuff you purchase. Otherwise, corporations will basically fuck us in the ass till we're bleeding completely, okay? It doesn't matter for a corporation. It doesn't matter. For them, it's all about making money. For us, it's all about preserving the stuff that we work hard to purchase, right? Now, obviously, I look at video games as video games, right? And some people look at this as, children's toys. But to me, video games are kind of just like a movie. They're like music. They're like software in general. They're just like any commercial good that you buy. And if you buy something, you should either be able to possess it, right, for an indiscriminate amount of time, or a company should just straight up tell you that you're renting stuff. Like I said in my previous video, if companies were outright telling you that you weren't buying their product and you were just renting it, I definitely will guarantee you that will have an actual impact on sales. Now, obviously, this needs to get to 1 million signatures. Now, do I think it'll get to 1 million signatures? I'm being positive. I actually hope that it will. I think the jump that we saw from literally yesterday is pretty massive, and it just continues to go up. The momentum that Ross felt like that he lost, I feel like that momentum is starting to kick up again. And honestly, if it meant getting into the muck with talking shit and correcting records, I think that's honestly what you have to do if it means doing something as good as this. Now, why is Stop Killing Games a good thing? Why is it a net positive? I'm going to go through a lot of technologies that communities have made that are literally preserving the games that we love and cherish all throughout history. So one of the things that I saw, and I can't verify this for myself, but it kind of made my head ache a little bit from Piratesoftware. So one of the comments that he wrote here was, For those who don't understand what MYM is and are spamming comments, this is a user-generated content game where you make dungeons that other people play in. Without a large player base, the game becomes instantly stale due to lack of dungeon variation. The community has all but abandoned it, so preserving the game would not keep it playable or enjoyable. Hosting it privately does not fix this issue, as it's designed with a large-scale creativity in mind. Without that, it's a hollow husk and unable to be played to any real extent. This isn't about preservation, it's about a waning player base on a game I enjoyed. You cannot preserve a game's true intention by saving the files. You cannot preserve the essence of a game like this with a small group of players. It needs thousands or more active players to give the actual experience. Stop Killing Games cannot fix that problem. Now, Meet Your Maker, for anybody that doesn't know, is an actual like building game where actual like gamers get together, they build these entire like, levels, and obviously it's then up to you as a player to play through these user-created levels. Now again, obviously this is a game that has a lifespan, right? But the preservation of the content that people have been doing and making since the first day of this game's launch up until the very end of its lifespan is important, because let's say you come back to this game, this moment in time, like 10, 15 years later, it's important that there is like a repository of this game that exists so we can at least play what the community built, right? Do you want to lose all of this content, all of this history to time just because the new game comes out or some newer sequel releases? Like, do we have to accept planned obsolescence? And if games are obsolete, do we have to let them completely die when we could have an option to preserve the content that is generated within them? So this is where I feel like I'm reading Kojima levels of fucking pretentiousness, except in this situation, Kojima's actually produced a bunch of video games, okay? From what I understand, Piratesoftware hasn't even shipped one out the door yet. Now, there's a lot of people that pointed out that apparently he had ties to like Rivals of Aether 2, which is a live service game, but I don't really think this is a completely negative situation. Again, as much as his words rub me the wrong way, I like to think of the best in people, okay? I really like to think that at best, this probably was just a misunderstanding. But reading stuff like this comment burns me a little bit. Because, yes, I understand, once a game falls off, like, yes, guys, Halo 3 fell off. You know what I mean? All the content in Halo 3, it's old. It's not, nobody new was coming in to make new maps, new screenshots, new anything. In fact, the community for that game on the Xbox 360 is effectively fucking dead. But preserving that community, preserving that experience is what's important, right? Preserving the game itself is what matters. Because down the road, let's say somebody wants to play or see how a game worked even, right? Like 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, they have the option of seeing it. So when he talks about user-generated games, I want to go through some technologies that community members have made. So for instance, this is Little Big Archive. Now, if you don't know Little Big Archive is a repository for levels that users have made for a game known as Little Big Planet. Now, if you don't know what Little Big Planet is, it's a platformer game for the PlayStation 3, PSP, PlayStation 4, PlayStation Vita, and I think it might have a PS5 version, I'm not entirely sure. But the community over here created level packs, profiles, community objects, game modes, and all types of challenges. So that if you, down the road, played this game that released literally back in like 2008, 2007, you can go to all of these projects, download these community levels, and you can run them on an actual hacked PlayStation 3, or you can run them underneath RPCS 3, which is what I did. Now, the thing about it is, obviously, to give you an idea, these are not, every single level that has been made. But if you go through this spreadsheet, ladies and gentlemen, according to this list, 4,875 levels have actually been preserved by this community. So let's say that you missed out on something like, Little Big Planet, and you want to experience this era of gaming down the road. Much like I like to go back to Super Nintendo games, PlayStation 1 games, this repository exists so anybody can experience something. Yes, we know Little Big Planet is dead. We know that the spirit of the game is not going to be captured with new content every day. But I think somebody playing a fucking 15-year-old game kind of knows that, okay? I think most people that have a functional fucking brain know that they're not getting that in-time experience. But they're also not getting a game that's been lost. Some of these levels probably meant a lot to somebody. Some of these levels are actually pretty intricate and fun. And some of these levels allow you to look at what people created back in the day. So one project that, again, is really interesting is Open Course World. Now, I'm sure you guys also have played games like Super Mario Maker and Mario Maker 2. Well, thankfully, a community of fans for this game have created a project or are working on something known as Open Course World. And of course, you can play this in an emulator or an actual custom firmware Nintendo Switch. So basically, they made a mod that reroutes the network requests in the game to their specific server. And of course, what they want to do is preserve a shit ton of Mario Maker levels. So eventually down the road, when something like, I don't know, Nintendo servers tend to go down, which, again, most servers will, right? Whether you're Microsoft, whether you're Sony, whether you're Nintendo, whether you're one of the biggest companies in the world, eventually, when there's not enough money on the table, you will probably not want to pay for server hosting. But that doesn't mean the community doesn't want to come together and put together as much of this software, as much of this actual, like, as much of this, like, community-created content as they can. Because the thing is, it's about preserving video games as they are, the history of them, and of course to make sure that down the road, if somebody wants to play Mario Maker 2, they can. Now, by Thor's logic, again, if a game just goes down, what's the harm in it? I mean, you know what? Stop Killing Games is not going to help, publishers develop an initiative to keep their projects alive, I guess. You're going to miss access to that in-time experience. You're not going to get that spirit or whatever the pretentious shit you're hearing here. The reality of it is that obviously this game, Hitman, is a brilliant title, okay? Unfortunately, it's a game that requires you to be having a constant internet connection all the time for progression. Now, you could play the levels without the internet, but without progression and like a lot of the community-created content, or really just the content that flows into the live service model, it's kind of a game that loses a lot of its replay value. Well, thankfully, without the help of IO Interactive, who haven't given a sunset plan, a guarantee, as far as I know yet, there's projects like the Peacock Project, where, again, the community has put together a project to keep this game alive long after it releases. You know how I played this game on the actual airports, like airplanes without the internet connection on a Steam Deck? By setting it up via their easy-to-follow installation guide, so you can play Hitman and its content without requiring IO Interactive servers, which will go down at some point. I know that for some people, like, I guess it seems Piratesoftware or anybody with this defeatist mentality, if that it doesn't preserve the ethos of the game or like the in-time experience, I think people know it. I also think that people just like to preserve and keep old experiences active for as long as they can. Because if you're willing to lose your history, if you're willing to just let these things wither and go away and become lost fucking media, then realistically, I don't think you're somebody that cares about gaming or gaming history. You know what? These AAA companies released the new $80 fucking Mario Maker. I'll just jump onto that and play it, all right? Completely ignoring the fact that, if you look at the history of video games, and I even talked about, PT recently, like a game released 10 years ago that you can just start to emulate on PC and preserve an actual piece of gaming history that we as a community talked about pretty extensively. And it's an actual identifiable part of at least horror video games, right? Like that subsect of the gaming community. If you're somebody that doesn't care about preserving this kind of shit or keeping these services active and alive so that down the road that $60 purchase you made is still playable, then again, I don't think you care about gaming. The actual project of Stop Killing Games is simple. It's just to keep games alive. It's not to keep them as unneeded rentals in the space. And again, the community has went above and beyond in preserving even networks. So for instance, Pretendo is a network that if you have a 3DS, if you have a Wii U, you can actually experience a clean room reverse engineered version of their network, so you can at least play certain games with your friends online, right? So for instance, if you wanted to play things like Kid Icarus Uprising on your 3DS, if you want to play some Mario Kart 7, they actually have preserved full network capabilities, or at least partial network capabilities, so people can play the fucking games that they bought, okay? All without requiring Nintendo. Now, of course, even RPCS3, one of my favorite PlayStation 3 emulators, because it really feels like Sony forgot about preserving that fucking system whatsoever. Yeah, even RPCN, ladies and gentlemen, RPCS3 has their own network that they've reverse engineered and put together so people can play games like Skate 3 together. People can play games like Demon Souls. Now, of course, obviously, they're not a massive community. You know, you're looking at 27 people playing Demon Souls. But to give you an idea of why this stuff is important, me and my friend Imaru, me and him play a lot of old games. And for us, we wanted to play Red Dead Redemption. I think it was like 2 years ago. And obviously the PC version wasn't out. And even if the PC version was out, remember nowadays companies will want to sell you $60 games with like multiplayer removed. Like single player is the only actual game mode, even though like back in the day when Red Dead came out, multiplayer was a pretty important part. It's something that I think a lot of people my age played if you were playing Red Dead at that era. So instead of, you know, letting that multiplayer wither away and be lost, we were able to play together under RPCN. We had a whole good night of beers and playing some fucking Red Dead together. And not only that, we were able to play things like Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker HD, and even abominations like Raccoon City Chronicles, like what was it, like the Resident Evil like third-person shooter game that we played co-op. These are all experiences that are preserved, thankfully, because of things like the community putting together the efforts to reverse engineer, you know, server code, entire like solutions like this. Because at the end, all right, this is just the community trying to keep video games alive without the involvement of the official developers, because that's honestly at this point the only way that a lot of people can do it. And that's why initiatives like Stop Killing Games are important, because if you can get these companies, if you can get these publishers to actually look and design games going forward with an end-of-life plan, we don't have to resort to efforts like this to keep a lot of those old games alive. You know, one of these sites that I used to go to was IJJI, and I'm sure I probably sparked some memories in a lot of you guys watching that are my age, because back in the day, going to IJJI, you could actually play games like Guns the Duel. And of course, one important game to me on this list was Drift City. Now, I made a video a few years ago where the community actually came together and used a private server solution to get Drift City here. Now, obviously, are there a lot of players playing this game? No, they've got 54 players online in the cel-shaded racing MMO. And for me, it's important that this exists because, again, I enjoy games like this. They're games that are preserved without the community's effort. I doubt any official server hoster is even thinking of making a game with an audience of 50 people on average. But the important part here is that the community was able to get leaked files, from my understanding, or at least reverse engineer a chunk of this game to keep it alive and functional. Because ultimately, these are all pieces of gaming history. And if you lose your video games, if you lose access to them, then it's a net negative for everyone involved. Even for Metal Gear Solid, right, there's projects like MGO, Save MGO, where players are able to play through Metal Gear Online 1, 2, and also play around with its DLC. One of my favorite channels on YouTube is Mach3, where he'll occasionally be live streaming PlayStation 3 games, PS2 games, and playing them online with viewers. These are dead games, but thanks to the technologies I talked about, he's able to play these experiences with his friends and his viewers. And again, these are experiences that are fucking, 10, 15, sometimes over 20 years old. And you can still play together because the community has banded and created solutions that have kept these games alive. And again, that comment that I read from Thor earlier just really drove me up the wall, because in the end, it's not we all understand that games that are old are dead, and you're never going to get that experience that happened as those games were live. But is it worth losing those experiences at all, or just preventing people from getting access to them down the road? You know how many games get life literally 5-10 years down the road? You know, games like Among Us, which were the talk of the town years ago, were out for literally years. Until, of course, the community picked up and those servers went from 10 active players to millions overnight. How many games like that do you think exist that just die over the course? Games that are even innovative, games that actually have, a reason to be played, games that can be fun if they were just discovered. If we lose access to these video games and down the road, we maybe watch a video that ends up getting into the algorithm and we think, wow, I wish I could play that game, but now I can't because it's gone forever. That is the world we want to change. And I think that's why this initiative is so fucking important. You know, if you look at things like why the EU matters here, is that in terms of economies, you're looking at the third largest economy after China and the United States. Meaning that if companies are pressured by EU law to think of end-of-life plans, because you're not going to ignore 15% of the world's GDP, you are going to think of this as an important market. If you're designing your games with an end-of-life plan, what happens in the EU ripples to all of these other countries. And that's how we all benefit. Unfortunately, me not being from the EU or being a Brit, I can't fucking actually sign any of these things. But I do know that I have to have a community of people that can sign this. In the amount of time I was yapping here, this number was at 511,000. If I refresh this page, it's up to 512. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is actual change. We're at 51%. We've got roughly a month. Can we make it to the finish line? If you really care about preserving your video games, I think you will do what you can to get this across the finish. And let's say that you're not let's say that you're not from this country, you're not from the EU. You can still share this message. You can still share StopKillingGames.com across all of your gaming communities. And hopefully, if the government of Europe can look at this and start maybe taking this actual case seriously, it could actually be something that changes gaming going forward forever. At least that's what I think. But if you want to be a defeatist about it, no, that's your choice to make. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Just like if you dislike it, I'm out.
Hello, guys and gals. Me, Mutahar, and you caught me in the middle of the night playing some SOCOM 2 on the old PlayStation. Now, you know, what is you would think that a 20-plus-year-old game probably has nobody playing online. And you're actually almost right about it. There's actually a community of 20, 30 people that come together probably every night to play this super old PS2 game. And I decided to modify my PlayStation 2, change some settings around, and connect to this server and have a good, fun night. And you know what, ladies and gentlemen? It's possible because this game isn't dead. I can't say that for every single game that we've played, but if you know me, game preservation is really important. And obviously, campaigns like Stop Killing Games are something I want to promote. Now, this is the third video very recently that I've talked about this. And if you're wondering why I'm super passionate, it's because I actually think Stop Killing Games can change the way gaming is preserved in the future. But I do want to make this video as sort of a video that shows you examples of games being preserved. I actually want to deconstruct a lot of Piratesoftware's words and basically show why Stop Killing Games actually matters, and why we shouldn't give up on this initiative just because some people want to be contrarians. Now, if you go to StopKillingGames.com, you will notice that it has, as of right now, about 695,000 signatures, meaning that this initiative is climbing incredibly fast. By the time we're finished this video, we might even get closer to 70%. Who knows? I'll actually look back at this by the time we're signing off. Now, for anybody that, needs a quick rundown of what's been going on, obviously Ross from Accursed Farms made a video about a week ago where he talked about Stop Killing Games and how they were on the last leg of the initiative. In fact, right now, it is the last month for this initiative, meaning that we literally just have a month to get those signatures. Now, it doesn't matter if you get the 999,999 signatures, you need the full million. So a big question is, obviously, for anybody in my audience that's from the EU or the United Kingdom, there will be links in the description below that you can go to, which will allow you to sign up and get those signatures. And again, only do this if you're from those areas. Please do not falsely fill out signatures if you don't actually belong in those areas. There is nothing more detrimental to this campaign than doing something like that. So, ladies and gentlemen, just remember, if you got friends and family, even if they don't play video games, this initiative actually goes far beyond video games and has the implications of doing way more.
Now, the reason why this initiative matters for all of us is that Europe represents around 15% of the world's GDP, meaning it's not an irrelevant economy. If something happens in Europe where game companies are effectively forced to give us end-of-life plans, they will have to effectively downstream this to the entire world. So whether you live in the United States, whether you live in Canada, whether you live in India, whether you live anywhere in the world, you will be benefited from European actions and regulations. Just understand that, again, if game companies, unless they're being deliberately malicious, when a game ends, you can play that game at its end of life. And even if it's locked to the European Union, nothing stops you from downloading the end of life build from Europe and using it anywhere else in the world. So we all benefit. Unfortunately, though, only the EU can sign.
So again, Ross from Accursed Farms made a video about a week ago where he talked about Stop Killing Games. They're on the end of this journey, and a big part of his video was talking about Piratesoftware and his unfortunate negative attitude regarding this actual thing. Now, no one should sign an initiative or be part of something just because the blind majority say so. If this initiative has problems, it's good to point them out. My only problem with it is I feel like Piratesoftware has done a lot of the negative contrarianism without actually giving cogent points on why he's been negative about it. And I'm not somebody that's a game developer, but I am somebody that is a programmer. I know my way around code. And honestly, the more I revisit a lot of Piratesoftware's words, the more I wonder, why are you so against something that is entirely possible? So I wanted to make this video a set of examples, and I want to show you a lot of projects that are centered around game preservation.
So I want to start off by saying that, yes, there are multiple types of games, right? And one of the things that obviously we don't need to really talk about are single-player things. So for instance, playing games like Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne, for instance, a game that is purely a single-player experience, as are many offline single-player experiences. It doesn't even have to be something from the PS2 era. You could literally be talking about a game right now. PlayStation 5, Death Stranding 2. Games are, again, offline only. Games that are single-player, fully on-disc titles, full experiences are obviously exempt from this discussion. Those games will never die as long as we have emulators and even original hardware that exists. Primarily, the games that are being targeted here are games that are online only, with a single-player attachment to them. So games like The Crew, which mostly could be played offline because that's a majority of its content, but arbitrarily require connection to Ubisoft servers, and once that connection is gone, as is the game, and as is the access for the game that you paid for, which gets removed from your library. Now, a lot of companies are completely okay with stuffing actual clauses in their user agreements which state that they can take your game away at any point, which we saw with games or, companies like Blizzard. Now, this is not okay. And again, I don't think that this would be a super huge issue, and where Thor would be right in this entire, initiative being wrong is if game companies had to actually even advertise that you weren't even buying a video game. You were just renting it all along. I seriously always go back to this example because imagine if you went on Steam and you wanted to buy a game like Helldivers 2, which is a live service game. Imagine if instead of the buy option, you just saw the words, "You're renting Helldivers 2," and at any moment it could be taken away. Could you imagine an impact of sales at that point if game companies were required to tell you that the game you were purchasing was just a rental? That's not what game companies do. Game companies will tell you that you're outright buying a game. And even if that game is an MMO or a single-player game with an online-only attachment, or it has a mixture of multiplayer, single-player, game companies can just take that away from you without any actual protection for the game, player. So we as gamers lose the history and memories of the games that we enjoy and love, and there's just nothing we can do about it. Game companies are totally okay with selling us, games that basically are just licenses. But I don't think the broader community really understands that what they have is just a license. If people knew that all they were buying were rentals, then I'm sure they probably wouldn't be buying a lot of games that they do. Imagine if every Blu-ray or DVD you purchased just said it's all a rental, and any moment this movie can be revoked from you. Imagine if a piece of music that you bought could be revoked at any moment from your possession. That's the same thing happening with video games, and it's not okay. Now, to show you some of the actual cool projects that exist, the footage you're seeing is Guns. Now, this is from a server called Freestyle Guns, which has around 100 people playing. Now, Guns, in my last video I talked about, used to be this big, MMO back in the day, or this big, online shooter back in the days of IJJI. Now, since it's been officially defunct, and it has a resurgence coming up, they're about to re-release this game, you can play it right now through a private server, which is where I got this footage from. But let's say you want to play older games like SOCOM 2 that actually had their online services completely shut down back in 2012. Well, through a community called PS Rewired, you can actually go through an official piece of hardware. So whether you have a real PS2 or through an emulator, you can modify some network settings around and play these games as they once were. So this footage of SOCOM 2 was literally recorded a few days ago underneath actual PlayStation 2 emulation. And this works between real hardware and emulation. Now, even beyond just SOCOM 2, another game that I wanted to try out was Metal Gear Online 2. Now, I used to play this back in 2008, and obviously Konami has long since shut down the multiplayer services. In fact, you can't even get Metal Gear Online with newer copies of MGS4. So provided you have an old day one build, you can rip the online files out of it and use specialized software to actually play online. So for instance, I was able to download this from Save MGO2. I can make an account where there's about 50 people on average playing the game at any given moment, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it's a small but budding community. And over here, all you can do is download a customized RPCS3 emulator, or if you have a jailbroken and maybe even an official PS3, you can play this game as it, originally released. And it's quite a lot of fun. Even though the skill gap is pretty huge, like generally the people playing this game are those people that are just god-tier experts. But if you give it a chance, you can experience a bit of gaming history. But arguably when I was filming this video, one of the coolest things that I saw was something called Insignia Xbox Live. Now, for anybody that missed out on OG Xbox Live before the Xbox 360, this led me through a process where I legitimately set up a Xbox Live account. Now, Insignia is a private server solution where it serves to emulate actual Xbox Live. So this footage was recorded in XEMU, which was an actual emulator, and I downloaded it, got my official Xbox dashboard set up. I went through the entire sign-up process, and then just for shits and giggles, I loaded up Phantasy Star Online 1 and 2, a game well over 20 years old. And to my shock, there are still people actually playing this game at the dead of night or any hours. Immediately when I jumped in, I noticed some players. We had a friendly interaction, we said hi to each other, and within a matter of minutes we were able to play this game together. A game this old, that servers are long dead, the community has banded together to bring back old projects. Now, not every single project works 100%, and most of these really don't have every single feature working, but there are projects like The Matrix Online, which again is an incomplete project, but it allows gamers to play certain MMO builds of a game called The Matrix Online from, I think it was Sony Interactive Entertainment. And even though you can't really do much in it, it's a great way to bring up a game from back in the day and sort of see a piece of history in gaming culture. And again, these are all projects the community has banded together to create and keep games preserved. And if the community is doing this through reverse engineering efforts, it would only be beneficial if companies had to have an end-of-life plan. So people who are interested in these games, or these games hold memories to you, you'll never actually lose them to the fabric of time, simply because that's what big corporations want you. They want you to immediately buy the next product, and they want to keep this world of planned obsolescence alive.
With projects like RPCN, you too can actually configure other PlayStation 3 games, like Killzone 2 for instance, and play them in online communities as well. It's all of the stuff that really adds into an amazing experience. And to cut back on, Jason's bullshit here, Piratesoftware's nonsense, I played literally Xbox Live on the OG Xbox again.
Now, one of the points that I didn't like from Piratesoftware was this one comment on his video regarding Meet Your Maker, a game with tons of user-generated content, where he said without a UGC game where you make dungeons that other people playing, without that large player base, that game becomes stale because of a lack of variation, which I guess is true. A lot of games do end up dying out. Now, in my previous video, I talked about Little Big Planet and how there exists an archive of old user-created content that can just serve as a scrapbook of time. I think we all know that eventually every large-scale game will wane in its player base and die. That's just how things go. That's business. That's life. That's YouTube channels. That's, just the slow march of time hitting, right? That's how things work. So it's not a matter of like you cannot preserve the essence of a game like this with a small group of players. It needs thousands or more active players to give the experience. And all those games that I showed you give you the experience and the essence of a game, even with player bases less than 100 average users at any given time. Now, granted, those games don't, have a bunch of UGC, but again, these are online experiences that we all grew up with that I think are really important, and preserving just the ability to play them is there. Because at some point, maybe you would like to go back and see where a certain favorite game franchise of yours went and what the gameplay consisted of. And if you can't access it, then there's just no way to experience it unless you maybe watch a YouTube video. And even that isn't the same feeling.
So inside one of these comments on, I guess, Louis Rossman's video, he writes, "I'm aware of the process of an initiative to be turned into legislature much further down the road, after many edits. If people want me to back it, then the technical and monetary hurdles of applying the request need to be included in the conversation. As written, this initiative would put a massive, undue burden on developers, both in AAA and indie, to the extent of killing off live service games. It's entirely too vague on what the problem is and currently opens a conversation that causes more problems instead of fixing the ones it wants to do. If we want to hit the niche and terrible business practices of incorrectly advertising live service games or always online single-player only games, then call that out directly, not just video games as stated in the initiative." So this is where I do tend to disagree. Calling out video games to exist well after a company wants to stop supporting them is the initiative. We don't want video games to die. It doesn't matter if the video game is a single-player experience, single-player with multiplayer, forced, or a live service MMO experience. It should have an end-of-life plan. Remember, the thing about Stop Killing Games was it was never retroactive, meaning that no matter what had happened after the initiative was passed and the laws were made, anything that exists as of right now is pretty much untouched. But it does set a precedent to go into the future that if you're a game developer and you want to cater to the EU markets, you should design an end-of-life plan. Remember, the EU economy is like 15% of the world's trade, which is not insignificant. After the Chinese and the Americans come the entire European Union. And so, of course, if something's going to happen in the EU, it's probably going to trickle down to the rest of the world. And that's why this initiative matters for all of us. And if we're going to push even further, it's not just video games that are the problem. I think the issue is we only focus on video games here. But let's say that you're somebody that loves movies or music. Remember, initiatives like this that focus on preservation matter for you too. Don't you want every single movie that exists out there to be preserved or something down the road so we as human beings don't lose any form of history? Don't you want music to be preserved? It's a lot different for movies and music because you can just screen record an entire season of a TV show or an entire movie. You can rip entire music CDs onto hardware. Hell, back in the day for the PS2, you could rip entire musical CDs all day, every day. Okay, that used to be a thing back then. Nowadays, not so fucking much, at least on consoles. And this is important. But when it comes to things like software, it's not just video games. A lot of big companies want us to be locked into this live subscription model. So whether you use things like Microsoft Windows or Adobe Premiere, for instance, which is a great example. Adobe used to be a software you could just go to the store and buy a copy of, for a specific, version of that year. Now, you could keep this version and install it whenever you wanted to, but now you have to be locked into subscriptions from Adobe. And there are times where even if you want to cancel that subscription, you may be subject to absurd cancellation fees. Things that shouldn't be legal are now legal and normalized. And it's really up to us as a consumer group to at least advocate for better solutions. There's good regulations like what happened to Apple. In the EU, Apple users are basically allowed to install whatever application they want to their phones. And Apple is so malicious, they geo-lock that to make sure that we in America, we in Canada, we anywhere outside the EU don't even get those benefits. But, when Apple was forced to basically go into their actual phones and get rid of their shitty lightning cable and give us USB-C, all of a sudden they touted all the benefits you get with this cable. Even though literally Android users had these benefits and Apple was the last holdout and they had to be forced by an entire economic zone to fucking cater with a better technology. It's actually insane sometimes that you have to regulate companies into doing just some good, or to protect the actual consumer, which is what Stop Killing Games is ultimately about. So looking further into like Piratesoftware's words over here, he talks about, more specifically in the second video, what really are these scenarios. So he talks about potential scenarios where a studio could be abused if the initiative was implemented as written. It adds new paths for abuse and that need to be discussed to help hone this initiative into something that would do good without doing harm. I then explained that very few people in the game development space can actually discuss this from the other side due to fear of losing their jobs. And a studio is much safer in silent dissent than they are discussing the drawbacks of your ideals. The recent attacks on our games is obvious evidence of this. My main issue with this initiative is that it is broad in its approach to change the industry and the exact language of the initiative, not the FAQ request that all games stay in a functional playable state. That is not feasible for all games at a technical level and could potentially restrict developers from making online-only games like MMOs, MOBAs, and user-generated content games in the future. That list is not exhaustive, and it doesn't matter if you do or don't like those kind of games. So this is one of those things where on surface level, yeah, it makes sense, right? Like, why would you ever want to stifle an MMO from existing, or a MOBA from existing, or any game with UGC? Except that's not what the initiative was ever about, and he's still not actually addressing what are the technical hurdles that you're stopping from this initiative being passed, right?
So I wanted to look at one of Piratesoftware's videos, specifically that second video he was talking about, and kind of understand what his points were and deconstruct them a little bit, because I don't think that they're actually all that valid.
That's the most common requirement of the initiative, which is games have to be left in a functional, playable state. Now, what happens if that game is a online-only live service game? Well, if you want that to stay in a functional, playable state, that means the devs have to release either server binaries or somehow carve off the game to be a single-player experience now. Some way to keep it functional and playable, right? Now, many of you are requesting, yes, I should get the server binaries so that I can go and make private servers for this. But that doesn't make a lot of sense in the real world. And the reason why is because it leaves developers open to abuse. So let's explore that a little bit. Let's say that you made your own video game, and you made a live service game. Maybe it's an MMO, maybe it's something else, right? And let's say that I want to monetize that game, but you don't allow monetization of the game by any other party. This makes sense because most creators don't allow for that. You can't just take someone else's art and profit off of it. Normal, right? So then I go, well, how am I going to force you to do this? Under this initiative, you would have to release the server binaries or keep the game in a functional, playable state at end of life. So I hit you with a ton of bots. I hit you with a ton of exploits. I attack your community, I destroy your Reddit, I go after your business. I go everywhere that I possibly can to make this cost as much as it possibly can for you. And it's not hard to do this. We saw the exact same thing happen in TF2 recently. The massive amount of bots that were attacking the game. This is not infeasible. This is something that is very easily attainable today. And let's say that this goes on long enough that your game dies because you can't afford it anymore, and your studio has to shut down. At end of life, you now have to release those server binaries to keep the game in a functional, playable state. At which point I take those, I create a private server, and I monetize it. And some people have said, well, simply don't allow monetization of the server. Well, who's going to enforce that? If you want a government initiative to enforce that, that means the government has to build a registry of all of those games and all of that intellectual property that shouldn't be monetized, and then somehow enforce that.
Now, there's a lot to unpack there, but I want to actually play everything in context. I don't want to be labeled a clip chimper in this situation. I don't want to be somebody that doesn't give you the full context of what somebody is saying. And again, if you want to see all of his video, it's completely available on his channel. But the actual example that he talked about here sounds a lot like corporate espionage, corporate sabotage, sorry, that's the better term. And the thing is, it's true, right? Like, yes, let's say that a company, and, he mentioned Team Fortress 2, which is a game that didn't even have official servers until after, Valve had transitioned things to a source multiplayer framework. But a lot of people did get those server binaries, and they did host games. And while TF2, yes, they had a bot problem, and I believe in some cases they still do, there's a lot of stuff the community has done with those server binaries provided by Valve to create an amazing, fun gaming experience. But what he's talking about is obviously, let's say somebody takes, your video game, they take your binaries, they basically attack your game, They attack your game with bots, nefarious practices, and as soon as your game is dead, right, because these people have attacked it, they'll release a server binaries, somebody takes your server binaries, they revitalize your dead game, and then inject things like monetization. So again, it's a vehicle, I guess, according to Jason, that people can legally attack a video game, destroy them, and then be able to rehost them and profit off of the art that another person created, which again, I think is a pretty legitimate thing to somewhat worry about, right? Like, yes, that could happen. But he's also talked about what is the enforcement mechanism? Would they have to have a registry? And what he's describing is something that already exists. Again, these are not situations that are, unavoidable. Companies like Riot Games, for instance, shut down an entire League of Legends private server because they felt it encroached their intellectual property and copyrights. And again, it's debatable if they did that, but they shut it down using the legal channels. Same thing with Blizzard when they shut down World of Warcraft private servers because they felt it was violating their terms of services or copyrights. And even people like Piratesoftware, who's an independent developer, has at times used the DMCA, and it's debatable if it's false or not, to weaponize it against people that he has not liked, people that he believed were abusing his copyright, and mostly his actual likeness. They took some apparently alleged clips from his stream, used them in promotional material, and instead of attacking the promotional material directly, it seems his team went directly for the actual developer's Steam, game, even though that Steam build did not have any of the offending DMCA material. Again, if you're worried about copyrights and you're worried about, people using things for nefarious purposes, the legal channels are available to protect your game even long after it's dead. There are games that have private servers that are still not supported. Nothing would even stop someone like Konami from going after that Save MGO project and shutting it down simply because they're distributing Konami assets. But let's go further in, okay? Again, I don't think that this should be a cause reason for preventing any form of preservation, whether things are live service or not. But Jason has a few things to say about live service itself. Let's hear this.
So, in the most extreme, people said live service games shouldn't exist at all, and the initiative will kill them off for good, and that's a good thing. Well, you don't get to define what players get to play or not play. You also shouldn't be able to get to define what developers build or don't build. You should not have creative control over the developers, and you should not have control over what is in my Steam library or on my phone. That doesn't make any goddamn sense. Aside from that, the initiative does not purport to kill live service games. It would just make it incredibly difficult to build said games and add a lot of risk to it, which is why I'm bringing all of this up and why I don't support the initiative in the first place. A lot of people don't realize that this will slowly diminish live service games in the market because it's not an incentive for us to build them anymore, which means you get less multiplayer live experiences.
And this is where I'm not going to mince words. I actually don't see the problem in any of that. I get that he likes live service experiences, but if regulation exists to prevent video games from all going into this planned obsolescence model, because here's the thing, it's a very rosy view that video games are live servicey, they constantly have, stuff being injected in, and for some stuff that can work, like, yeah, an MMO probably needs to be connected online all the time, but to not have an end-of-life plan for when that game eventually goes away is an issue. Now, he does mention later on in this video, and I don't need to play it, but obviously, I think a big problem is how these games are built, right? Like, obviously, if you, as a developer, came out and said, hey, buddy, listen, you're just renting the game, you're not buying it, that would alleviate a lot of purchasing concerns. But I also think it would very negatively impact the sales of a video game if people were just told outright, yeah, this is a rental. So if you're spending $60 today, well, you might consider getting a game that'll be around, long after. You don't want to get something that has a end-of-life guarantee, but you just don't know when that end of life is. Now, the thing is with live service stuff is, look, if game companies are regulated to, again, have an end-of-life plan, and that means that producing a video game that is planned to be obsolete from the beginning is risky, then that really isn't anybody's problem, okay? At the end of the day, that should be a practice that isn't accepted in the gaming sphere. I get that you like live services. I played a few live services that I enjoy myself. But I'm thinking of the long-term implications of game preservation, and he does touch upon it here.
To fix something. So the next one is that this is about games preservation and that it needs to happen to preserve these types of games for future generations and for everyone to always have forever. But I would argue that this isn't actually preserving these games. Social games, such as, let's say, Apex Legends, require a number of players to be in the match at the same time so that you can have an experience that is only able to be obtained through lots of players interacting, right? It's a multiplayer game. You need a bunch of people. How many of you have felt negatively when an MMO dies or when a live service game dies? Oh, dead game. There's only 5 people online. Why would I play that? So why would you want to preserve a game in that state? That doesn't make any sense to me. You want to take down these live service games, put them up on a private server, and then play it with a couple of people. You're not bringing it back at its height. You're not taking a snapshot of what the game actually is. You're making it limp on in a way that doesn't make any sense. That's not preservation. And for those that may stop there and go, but private servers going to have a lot of players. Look at all the ones for World of Warcraft. Again, we talked about that. It opens up a route for abuse of the developers.
Now again, when it comes to the abuse of developers, sure, but those developers can always go through the legal channel as you have when there was abuse that you perceived. And any large company does that and still does it to this day. But the thing about any of this, like, you're not capturing games and preserving them as their height or like whatever, that to me doesn't really make any sense. And I don't know why he harps on it. We all know that games eventually drop off. There are games, where live services will come to an end. Nobody's talking about replacing these games as they're active. Again, a live service experience we know will choose to end its service, and you should be able to play on those servers as long as the company's willing to support them. But what happens afterwards, if you bought a game and you weren't even notified that you were renting the game all along, you should be able to have some way to access features of the game, not every single feature, but enough to play the core content of the game after it drops, because you paid for the game. Simple as that. That's the argument being made. And yes, granted, I've been showing you Metal Gear Online footage this whole time. Do you think this experience is reflective of the game at its peak? No. There's 50 people currently as I'm recording this game? Yes, that's not representative of this entire community. But it allows the gamers who are interested in this to at least play the multiplayer functionality, even if it's not what the game was at its peak. There's a lot of games that have been lost to time, and this allows us to at least preserve some aspect of the game, because the only other alternative that Jason is providing is to just let the fucking game die. Simple as that. Lose that aspect of gaming history, which I simply, and millions of others, do not accept. And it's not just Jason, it's not just gamers, it's other developers, people that are also passionate about video games to the point of producing it themselves. This is a serious consumer advocacy movement that wants to preserve video games instead of adding in extra barriers to prevent, video games from being made. Again, if you're worried that live service models and MMO models are threatened because of this, again, I ask you on a technical level, how does this initiative inhibit any video games? He mentions this possible abuse that can exist, and there are avenues for companies, large and small, to address this abuse through a legal channel that exists right now.
But if you ask, what are the technical hurdles? What prevents an MMO from existing if it has an end-of-life plan or not? A lot of those games, even the Matrix Online that I showed you earlier, hell, forget that. Games like World of Warcraft, games like Final Fantasy 15, hell, Final Fantasy 11 even, right? A lot of MMOs have server emulators or even server binaries that are out there in the world floating. And it allows people to take that game and actually preserve it, or at least have a server that's available long after companies stop supporting it. Does that mean that a game like World of Warcraft suddenly just doesn't exist, or is one of the most popular MMOs, yes, World of Warcraft, capable of providing users with an end-of-life plan? What is an MMO game that that literally would be ruined if something like Stop Killing Games existed, right? Would it be games like Destiny 2? Would it be games like Anthem? Would it be any MMO, like GTA Online, for instance, that would cease to function if all of a sudden game developers were, forced to have an end-of-life plan from the very beginning of its development? That's the question that I actually want to ask. Now, do I think that Piratesoftware is a completely malicious individual in this? The part of me that has the best of faith to everyone, that likes to believe in the good of everyone, likes to think that, no, he's obviously not a malicious person. I don't think he's an evil person, because I really do think that he is misinformed, and he is coming at this from a pretty combative standpoint. At some point, when you're so wrong, you can either let your ego completely take over and refuse to change your beliefs even in light of all this new information. Or, it's a situation where, again, maybe he is really malicious. Maybe this is somebody that has more of a corporate view of the gaming industry and not somebody that believes in the actual good of the gaming industry or believes in consumer protection. Because if Piratesoftware really cared about the gamer, right, the video game industry, he would not be against consumer protections. Because these consumer protections are not designed primarily to ruin or make game development harder for the indie or AAA. It just makes it so that when these game companies decide to produce video games, they have an end-of-life plan. Meaning that for the people buying their video games, they can at least feel protected and safe in their purchases. And I think that's really the most important part of this. Look, I can talk your ear off about game preservation all day. I've done it for years on my channel. But the reason why I'm so passionate about this is that I feel what Ross has done, the campaign that he started, is that if this passes, and I hope to God it passes because it starts a dialogue, and that dialogue then involves a bunch of policymakers to think about how they want to craft and write these laws. Remember, this is just an initiative. We can hammer out the fine details once this gets introduced. But down the road, if all of this does get introduced and passed, it means that all of us gamers around the world benefit because game preservation becomes codified. And that's the important part of it. So yes, am I a little bit angry at Piratesoftware for misrepresenting this initiative and still constantly becoming the lightning rod for just not, presenting it in a good faith manner? Yes, absolutely. Do I wish this drama had to exist? No, I wish it didn't. I wish, honestly, many gamers could look at this without the lens of being combative and realize that consumer rights are just a good, positive thing for everyone involved. But honestly, the thing that I care about now, beyond all of this, is that this initiative passes. So again, to go back to the Stop Killing Games website, in the amount of time we've talked about this, we went up around 2,000 signatures. And that is the kind of progress we need to be seeing. So don't listen to Piratesoftware. Don't listen to anybody that is riding the fucking cocks of corporate game development. Look at the people that are talking about consumer protections and the preservation of video games going forward. In this video, I showed you a whole bunch of projects that exist to keep games alive and active. But there also exist so many video games that are dead. There was a game that I used to play back when I was a teenager called MAG, a 256-player, Battlefield-like game for the PlayStation 3. And for a lot of the games that exist right now, that game has been lost forever to time. If Stop Killing Games had passed all the way back then, and games like MAG were thought with an end-of-life plan, I could probably play an amazing, innovative game. A game that hasn't even been replicated to this day at all in that capacity. At least, something like MAG. And I'm sure that for some of you guys watching that are younger than me, you probably want to go back and play old experiences. You want to at least give it a try, right? You want to at least see, how games just evolve. Even if you're not a gamer, you probably just want to see how this technology grew over time. Well, without initiatives like Stop Killing Games, if you don't play something right there and then, you might never get the experience to play it again. I thought Concord was a pile of dog shit. And most people did. That's why it died in less than a week. But, damn, would I like to go back and maybe experience it again with some friends for one drunk night? Sure. Unfortunately, you can't. Because it didn't come with an end-of-life plan. Anyways, talked about it too much. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. But more importantly, please go to StopKillingGames.com. If you can, sign this initiative. Because every signature matters. We have 1 month left. And goddamn, do I want to see that signature pool well past 1 million. The momentum is here. We might actually get all the way to the end. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. I am out.